Trusting your Sunday is coming along well, or at least you're trying to. A lot is happening globally and locally. It's not any different, but we have you covered in this news broadcast, and it's going to be special tonight covering coronavirus. But first things first, let's look at today's highlights. Tonight, Kenya's coronavirus count climbs to 15.
We have received confirmation of an additional 8 cases.
Kilifi Deputy Governor is infected, was reckless and will be prosecuted. Plus, on the brink of a lockdown, old habits call for new measures and new sternness.
Behaving normal under these circumstances is akin to having a death wish.
We shall enforce this without mercy.
No unnecessary meetings, nor weddings, nor parties, just stay at home. And a case of faith or foolishness.
Tunaamini kwamba Mwenyezi Mungu ndiye anayeponya.
Some churches ignore call to avoid gatherings and hold Sunday services. Also tonight, making a killing. They make profits through children abusing drugs and expose the young ones to COVID-19.
Tunaona magari ya askari inakuja inachukua pesa.
This is Weekend Edition with Dennis Okari.
We're coming to you live from the Nation Center, but remember you can follow us on our social media platforms, that is YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, and the handle is NTV Kenya. With the coronavirus pandemic having claimed over 13,600 lives around the world, the number of confirmed infected patients in Kenya may seem small, but the threat is real big. Many have questions as to what they can do to protect themselves and their families. We will get as many answers from our panel of medical experts tonight from the medical fraternity. They are already here in studio. We're going to cover pretty much the coronavirus and all the questions that you've been asking, your thoughts, your concerns, as well as your fears. And David Agondoa is a sign language interpreter and will be helping us in tonight's broadcast. And we start off with our top story. The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in the country have more than doubled in the last few days. Kenya has confirmed 8 more cases, bringing the total number of patients to 15. And in yet another alarming development, the government says it is tracing some 363 individuals who came into contact with the 8. Seth Olale reports that the government is now warning that the country risks plunging into a full-blown crisis due to non-adherence to the laid-down guidelines.
The nationality of the 8 new cases confirmed were announced by the chairman of the National Emergency Response Committee, Mutahi Kagwe, who is also the Cabinet Secretary for Health, after a 4-hour emergency meeting at the office of the President. The 8 who tested positive are 5 Kenyans, 2 Frenchmen and a Mexican. They are reported to have arrived in the country through Jomo Kenyatta International Airport between the 4th and 17th of March. The latest cases were confirmed in the last 72 hours. Their ages range between 20 and 67 years.
All the patients, except the one who is at the coast, at Msambweni, are all in stable condition. The government is organizing to having the patients in Msambweni airlifted to Nairobi for further treatment.
The government is tracing 363 people believed to have come into contact with the 8.
The 8 people you are talking about, some of them are tourists. They have been to the pubs, they have been to the hotels, they have come in touch with some of us, and you don't know, as you speak next to your colleague, you don't know who is sick. And therefore we are saying this is not business as usual.
So far, there are only 3 people awaiting processing at the Bagathi Isolation Center, with the rest having been processed and discharged. While admitting that the virus is taking a toll on the elderly in the society, the health CS wants the youth to be similarly cautious. Authorities are now warning of dire consequences similar to the situation in Italy if Kenyans will not follow the laid regulations aimed at preventing further spread of the virus.
The experience of Italy started exactly the way we are behaving, where we have told people not to go into gathering, but some of them have decided, because of tithe and because of contributions in a church or because of contributions in other gatherings, that they must continue to do so. We all know what is happening in Italy today. Yesterday, 789 people lost their lives in 24 hours. There is nothing that we have done that is not going to give us exactly the same experience if we exhibit exactly the same behavior.
The total number of confirmed cases in the country is now 15.
When you go into this kind of social gatherings, it is almost like committing suicide in the long run, in the medium term. And the social media today is abuzz with individuals who are nauseated by the behavior that Kenyans are exhibiting, even as we know the circumstances that are ahead of us.
In trying to curb on the numbers and flatten the curve, the Ministry of Health earlier today unveiled Africa's first telemedicine diagnostic and reporting center at the Kenyatta National Hospital. The technology will help facilitate, among other things, coronavirus detection. The COVID-19 confirmed cases have since tripled from the time the government started announcing the initial infection. Now, authorities want Kenyans to report any suspicious cases to the nearby health facilities. Seth Olale, NTV, Nairobi.
As a result of the new cases, the government has now escalated the guidelines and directives aimed at containing the spread of the coronavirus in the country. This follows cases of defiance by most Kenyans of the appeal to take responsibility at this time. The new measures include complete shutdown of churches, mosques, clubs, bars and entertainment spots.
All international flights are suspended effective Wednesday, the 25th at midnight. The only exception to this rule are cargo flights whose crew must observe strict guidelines. Those coming into the country between now and Wednesday, may they be Kenyans or foreigners, will undergo mandatory quarantine at a government-designated facility at their own expense. Countries wishing to evacuate their nationals must make their arrangements to do so within this period. Kenyans who are currently in foreign countries and will not have come back within the said period are advised to observe the guidelines issued in their respective countries wherever they are. All persons who violate the self-quarantine requirement will be forcibly quarantined for a full 14 days at their cost and thereafter arrested and charged in accordance with the Public Health Act. Effective midnight tonight, all bars will remain closed until further notice. Restaurants are to remain open, but only for purposes of facilitating takeaway services. All public service vehicles must adhere to the directive issued on Friday, March the 20th, failure to which the respective SACCO licenses will be revoked. The Inspector General of Police, who is present with us here today, has been directed to enforce this directive. NAC has directed the suspension of all church, mosques, funerals, and funerals and other social gatherings and funerals are restricted to immediate family members only. Go home. Stay at home. People are getting sick because they came in touch with somebody else.
And now the government is shifting from just appealing to the public to observe the directives and guidelines to enforcing them through police officers and regional administrators. Interior Principal Secretary Karanja Kibicho and Inspector General of Police Hilary Mutiambai say anyone who will be found to have violated the directives will be arrested and charged in accordance with the Public Health Act. Vincent Odur has more.
The government now seems to be losing patience with the public over the increased reluctance to comply with the directives aimed at containing the possible spread of the COVID-19, more so that relate to social distancing. In response, the Interior Ministry has now directed regional commissioners, county commissioners, and local administrators to enforce all the measures in their areas of jurisdiction.
The national government administration officers are hereby directed to ensure that that directive is complied with, and you will be punished if it's found that in your area of jurisdiction there are those entertainment spots, bars that are open.
Police officers have now been directed to collaborate with the administration officers to strictly enforce the directives in accordance with the Public Health Act. The new measures have suspended public gatherings in places of worship, bars, clubs, and entertainment spots, and the public transport sector.
To start by this midnight, enforcing the closure of the bars from the midnight. Start enforcing the regulations of the matatus, observing the outlined regulations, observing distance in the matatus, the numbers of passengers in the matatus. And
the county emergency response teams have been formed, co-chaired by the county governors and the county commissioners. The purpose of this committee is to domesticate and adapt the national coronavirus emergency response team.
According to the Public Health Act, any person while suffering from an infectious disease willfully exposes himself without proper precautions against spreading the said disease is guilty of an offense and liable to a fine not exceeding 30,000 shillings or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years or to both. Besides that, those who fail to provide disinfection of public conveyance are guilty of an offense and are liable to a fine not exceeding 40,000 shillings. Vincent Odur, NTV.
Among the first individuals to face the full force of the law for contravening the provisions of the Public Health Act and the directives of the government is Kilifi Deputy Governor Gideon Saburi. Saburi was arrested and taken into forceful isolation upon return from an international trip after he failed to comply with the directive to voluntarily self-quarantine. Our Coast reporter Kevin Mutai has more.
2 weeks ago, Kilifi Deputy Governor Gideon Saburi jetted back into the country from an official visit in Germany. He is said to have proceeded with his normal functions, defying an order to self-isolate for 14 days. He held meetings in his office, met with county staff, including his boss, Governor Amason Kingi, and even attended community events in the county. He was then forcefully placed in isolation, and now the government has vowed to make an example of him.
All persons who violate the self-quarantine requirement will be forcibly quarantined for a full 14 days at their cost, and thereafter arrested and charged in accordance with the Public Health Act. And I would like to add here that this will apply to a senior government official in Kilifi who defied and refused to self-quarantine, who is now being forcibly quarantined in a facility, And upon the completion of the period given by our health authorities, the person, the official, will be charged.
Governor Amason Kingi says that he is currently in self-quarantine as a result of the contact with his deputy. He has also instructed all other county employees who came into contact with Saburi to do the same. Kingi also indicated that his deputy has already submitted names of all the persons he came into contact with, which has in turn been submitted to the authorities to trace them. Reports also indicate that the deputy governor had been requested by his boss to cancel the trip to Germany, but he did not.
You have made us go for quarantine. Quarantine is not easy. Quarantine is very expensive. Quarantine, you don't move. You sit in the house. You eat there. You don't move outside. You're forced to stay in that house for 14 days.
Coast Region now has confirmed 2 cases for COVID-19, another being a French national in Msambweni, Kwale County. Health officials are also searching for those who came into contact with him. Most of the public places in the region, especially beaches, clubs, restaurants, have been closed. The challenge, however, remains in the public transport sector, where operators are accused of ignoring the directives. Kevin Mutai, NTV, Mombasa.
Well, based on this story, we'll be speaking shortly to Kilifi Governor Amason Kingi on the developments on the developments of what has happened in his county a little later on. But let's move on now. As a number of churches across the country have opted to suspend services and directed their members to follow online services due to the coronavirus pandemic, some institutions like the Catholic Church remained open, saying the sanctuary is a focal point of prayer where you will find solace and strength during this difficult moment. In Mombasa County, police stopped Jesus Celebration Center, JCC, in service after they claimed the church had failed to adhere to the personal hygiene and social distance directives. Rose Wangoi has more details.
Following the new directive, this will be the last Sunday doors of the Holy Family Basilica Church in Nairobi will open to congregants for the foreseeable future. Those who turned up today had to adhere to the social distancing of the 1.5-meter rule. Holy water was removed from the entrances. The sign of peace, normally a handshake, replaced by waving, offertory was done after the final communion prayer. The Anglican Church of Kenya had suspended its Sunday services across the country for the next 30 days in line with the directive that seeks to help curb the spread of the coronavirus. At the All Saints Cathedral, the church was empty with only a handful of people who are here for individual prayers.
If people came here and got affected by the virus, surely am I not responsible as a leader?
The Anglican Church had also asked couples that had planned weddings for the next 4 weeks to consider cancelling their nuptials, something that is now a directive.
Long after coronavirus has been secured, we will still have weddings, we will still have churches, we will still have mosques. But what is the point of continuing with these institutions as if nothing is happening and cut your gathering post-coronavirus by half? What is the logic? What is it that I do not understand when we tell Kenyans this is not a joke?
In Mombasa County, there was drama at Jesus Celebration Center in Bamburi after police stormed the church and stopped the proceedings because they had failed to adhere to the personal hygiene and social distancing directives.
Hata tuweze kusema mambo aina gani, tuweze kusema corona, malaria, bado Mwenyezi Mungu ndiye ana nguvu, ndiye ana uwezo wa kutuponya.
That will, however, not be tolerated by the authorities moving forward.
If you are found with an open church in your area of jurisdiction, disciplinary action will be taken against you. There will be no gathering in mosques, in shrines, and in all places of worship.
The new directive on public gatherings will perhaps reiterate the truth that the church is not merely the building people assemble in, but the flock will now hopefully follow the decree given. Rose Wangoi, NTV.
Now, as the country and the world at large takes drastic measures to minimize the spread of the coronavirus, in some residential areas, it is business as usual. We now bring you a story of how some people have taken advantage of the government's directive for people to stay at home and are making money using children. The picture of Nairobi's Kwale area, one which on the surface and amid the hustle and bustle puts out a sense of peace. But some of the things happening here will evoke anything but peace. This shop in Nyamavila area is home to some big business. Don't be deceived by the signage. It was difficult filming here, but we managed to secretly monitor transactions that would pass as usual from this shop until you get close. The candy posters around the shop lure children, but what they are buying are not sweets. This little boy is buying drugs and walks away chewing gum, only that it's not bubble gum. Not too long after, another group of children with a young boy enter the shop and buy the drugs from this man. Outside the shop is this woman selling miraa, but monitoring movements outside the premises. What they are selling is marijuana or bang and another hallucinating drug with a street name, Blue Blue. They sell one roll of bang at 50 shillings. The tablet of Blue Blue goes for 5 shillings. Not far from the candy shop is a building under construction. Children are doing what children do, playing. To them, the uncertainty around coronavirus is a conversation for the adults. But the adults are ignoring the responsibility to engage them and offer guidance, more so in these critical times. Behind the walls is this woman selling illicit brew popularly known as changa. Social distancing does not apply here. They drink as they play with the children. Each man queues to get a cup of changa, walks away or joins his peers to chat. But drinking changa, which is illegal, is not the lone and more concerning issue here. They are sharing the cups. The sheer ignorance of what this can do if one person has an illness, more disturbingly, the new coronavirus, is unimaginable. The most vulnerable are the children.
Tumejaribu kuongelesha umama, utamaliza watoto wa watu wakasema yeye wake hawakunywi.
Virus hiyo ya corona ikikuja huku, hiyo ndio itamaliza vijana kwa sababu hiyo wote wanaedaga huko kama wameshikana, wanakuja wakishika watu.
This police vehicle passed by the building. The officers collected their bribes and drove away. The men continued drinking and the children who are exposed continued playing, oblivious of how their lives are being played with.
Tunaona magari ya askari inakuja inachukua pesa. Tunaona kama ni hawa wengine wakubwa wanakuja hapo, wanachukua pesa hadharani mchana.
Tutafanya nini sasa? Hii ni ugonjwa imekuja. Na hii ugonjwa tunakaa kwa nyumba, mtu anakaa kwa nyumba. Hatuendi wengine hawaendi kazi. Hatusalimiani.
This child's father caught him smoking bang in the estate. The furious parent tried to beat him, but was stopped by neighbors. Parenting in this global health crisis assigns adults some challenging homework. However, unfortunately, caution is being thrown out of the window despite fervent calls for people to stay at home and avoid contact, as for many, it appears to be either business as usual or just another extended holiday. Well, it's a reckless way of making a living. I'll be following that story up for you to find out what has happened to those individuals. But earlier we had aired a story about the Deputy Kilifi Governor who is now facing the full force of the law for contravening the provisions of the Public Health Act. And let's now speak to Kilifi Governor Amason Kingi on this development. He now joins us through a phone link from his county. Good evening, Governor Kingi.
Good evening, Dennis.
All right, Governor, my first question will be, have you been tested?
Yes, I got tested on Thursday, and I got my results on Friday around noon. And thank God the results turned negative.
So at this particular point, are you and the county staff safe? Because most of you came into contact with the deputy governor.
And it is true that quite a number of my county staff came into contact with the deputy governor. So we have managed to identify those who did come into contact with the deputy governor. We have ordered them to go on the mandatory 14-day quarantine. And we are making very close follow-up to make sure that indeed they're observing this particular protocol. Personally, I'm quarantined. I'm doing my 4th day today, and I will go the whole hog. I need to clear my 14 days before I can meet anybody.
Well, it's part of the reason why we couldn't send a reporter to you because of that. But we're also getting reports that you had instructed your deputy not to travel, which he defied, and then later to self-quarantine, which again he defied. Is this true?
Well, initially we had cleared him to travel because he was going on a promotional tour. It was an ITB, promotional tourism. And he was supposed to travel, him and my CC tourism. But before the date of the fair, we actually got notification that the conference had been cancelled because of coronavirus. And I sat pretty knowing that, of course, nobody was traveling. So later on, I came to learn that he had traveled.
Well, the government says that he will be punished because of contravening provisions of the Public Health Act. But are you going to take any disciplinary measures against it? Because there are a number of those who are saying that he was freely walking around his spot knowing that he had exposed himself.
I think we will just allow the law to take its course. That's what I can say for now.
Well, Governor, many thanks. We wish you well, and all your county officials and your cabinet will be speaking to you much later on in the week to just find out how you are doing. But we wish you all the best and all will be well. Well, at that point, we take a short break. We'll be right back with our panel. We have a lot to cover. All your questions, your fears, and your concerns will be addressed in this special broadcast. Stay with us.
Protect yourself against coronavirus by using Amara antibacterial hand sanitizer that will effectively clean your hands and eliminate disease-causing virus while you're on the go. In line with government regulations against traders hiking the price of hand sanitizers, report any trader selling out of the below prices to 254 20864 2331 or 254 20864 233.
Niaje wa Kenya. Hii ni public service announcement kuhusu coronavirus.
The Ministry of Health advises all returnees from abroad to self-quarantine for at least 14 days, whether they feel well or unwell.
Wash your hands regularly following the 8 steps of hand washing. Wet hands with warm water. Apply a small amount of soap. Rub palms together. Rub fingers and thumbs and the bits in between. Rub nails on palms, rub the back of each hand, rinse with clean running water, and dry thoroughly with a clean dry towel.
Furthermore, it is advisable to cover your mouth and nose adequately when sneezing or coughing and immediately dispose of the tissue in a dustbin. Please do not use handkerchiefs if you can avoid it. If disposable tissue is unavailable, cough into your elbow. Try and avoid close contact with anyone showing signs of respiratory illness, such as coughing or sneezing.
Before you share any coronavirus information on social media, please verify it with Ministry of Health to avoid panic and alarm among your fellow Kenyans.
New Blue Band Mayonnaise. Made from natural ingredients with omega-3 and 6 to enjoy long-lasting freshness and natural taste unlike any other mayo. Grow healthy and happy kids with New Blue Band Mayonnaise.
For a better tomorrow, don't forget to do the 1, 2, 3 with Colgate every night.
Smile through your day with a fresh breath and strong teeth.
This week,
Egerton University take on art as they dig deep into the use of art to preserve our history.
Where exactly? Can you tell us like the exact location? Because saa zingine maps ni tricky. Okay.
Turn left.
Hapo left hapo. Hapa. Hapa.
We shouldn't turn off the main road. Okay.
Welcome home to Amani Ridge, the place of peace. Invest in Amani Ridge, the place of peace. Call us today on 0790 300 300 or visit www.optivan.co.ke.
Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. Now, this week we asked you to send short videos of yourselves asking questions about the coronavirus. What are your concerns or your fears? Tonight, it's all about you, as this next part will be led by the questions you wanted medical experts to answer. Joining me in this conversation is Dr. Mercy Mwangangi, who is the Chief Administrative Secretary, Ministry of Health, and she's the only lady in this panel. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have two professors and two doctors, and I'll start with Omu Anzala, who is a professor of virology and immunology, Kavi Institute of Clinical Research, University of Nairobi. The next professor is Rodney Adam, an infectious disease specialist from the Aga Khan University Hospital. Last but not least, I'm also joined by Dr. Paul Younger, who is a medical doctor with clinical training in infectious diseases, HIV medicine and public health, a travel medicine specialist. He has a lot of titles, this doctor. Gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Like I mentioned earlier, this segment will be driven by the audience. I have a few questions that I'm going to throw at you, but feel free to answer them. The first question perhaps I'll ask is concerning today's press briefing by the Health CS, and I think I'll direct this question to Mercy, Dr. Mercy. A lot of people have been asking this question about the cases that have been coming in, and the CS said that all the cases, all the coronavirus cases are imported, and the people are saying that the airport should have been closed a long time ago because all this came through JKIA. Do you think closing them this coming week on Wednesday, stopping all international flights apart from the cargo flights, is a little too late?
So, Dennis, the CS was clear today that we all need to be alert. We need to scale up our response to this virus. And indeed, we truly believe that the measures that were given out today, the directives that were given out today on ensuring that all international flights are banned coming Wednesday will help us in this fight. The Ministry of Health has been emphasizing through guidance from WHO that we have to ensure we social distance. And in social distancing, we will be able to flatten the curve. So we truly believe that the measures put in place today will go a long way in aiding this fight. As the CS reiterated, we need to brace for the worst. This is the week within which we have to escalate our interventions.
Well, thank you, Dr. I think I can throw this to any of the gentlemen on the panel. Do you think this is coming in a little too late? We have all the cases which are imported coming through JKIA when there were calls to stop international flights a long time ago.
Well, I think so far with regards to scaling up of interventions, you normally want to start very low. When the CS initially talked about the issue of social distancing, I do agree with Madam CS that, of course, at some point you really want to make sure that as you're implementing your social distancing, you don't want to be as strict as would be anticipated. But as we start seeing a growing in the number of cases, then that's where we also want to titrate your interventions upwards so that you make sure that you don't experience an upsurge, especially in the number of imported cases, so that you have actually a bit of time to deal with the cases that are within the country.
Well, Professor Anzala, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's late because within the very first week, when the first few cases were announced, we actually put in measures immediately to begin social distancing. Really what we ought to be doing is that these measures must be observed. That is actually the critical thing. So today was an issue of now escalating, and today was also an issue of ensuring that those who begin to violate those measures, something is actually done. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not too late.
It's not too late?
Yes.
Do you agree with that, Professor Rodney Adam?
Yes, and I like to emphasize that those decisions are really difficult decisions, because when you put restrictions into place, you're also affecting people's livelihood out there. So if you're too strict, then you have a problem. If you're not strict enough, then you have a problem. And we've never been this direction before. So I think those decisions are very difficult, and I have to admire the ministry for the way they're handling it.
Well, without any further ado, I want us to jump in straight to the videos from our audience, and I'll start with the first video, and it's about salty water. Let's listen in.
Okay, there's a rumor spreading about the COVID-19, which I don't know whether it's true or not true, that before the incubation period ends, which is 14 days, in the first 4 days when you have detected that maybe you have the disease, when you take salty water, it will kill the virus which is still staying on your throat. That the virus is still not yet in your lungs, but is still on your throat. So I don't know whether it's true that the virus is still on your throat and you can save yourself.
Dr. Mercy Mugangi, I'll throw this at you.
Right, so that's incorrect. So we've had many rumors in social media. Salt water will not kill the virus. Vinegar will not kill the virus. Concoctions of garlic and ginger will not kill the virus. In terms of how this virus behaves and how it attacks the body, there is no evidence right now that's able to tell us that the virus stays in the throat and then goes into the lungs. It's a new disease. The scientists are working on it. But all the myths that are treading in terms of if I take alcohol, if I take changa, if I take vinegar, all those are false.
So this is the point where we separate the myths from the facts. And I want us to go to the next video. And it's about something totally different. It's about alcohol.
Maybe just to add to what Marcia said.
Yes, Professor.
I think the understanding should be that when the virus lands on the mucosal surfaces in the throat, it's not that it stays there. Viruses infect very, very quickly. They bind onto the cells on the surface and immediately penetrate those cells, and the infection actually begins. So it is a myth to think that the virus is sitting around on the surfaces for a long period of time. They are already inside, and the replication period begins. And that's why we talk of a period of about 7 to 8 days. And this period of time, the virus is already replicating in the cells before the one begins to get sick.
So gargling salty water does not help. Very, very clear.
Help.
Let's go to this next one, and it's about alcohol.
Can consumption of alcohol make someone self-defended or secure from catching corona? Because we understand most of the sanitizers are having 70%.
Well, this I think I'll throw it to Professor Rodney Adam. Interesting.
No, drinking alcohol will not help. In fact, it lowers inhibitions, and it might keep you from practicing proper hand hygiene, social distancing, etc. So alcohol has nothing to offer good and potentially bad.
Well, that's just straightforward. There's another one here, and it's all about what are the other symptoms, apart from everything else that we are talking about, the coronavirus.
Apart from sneezing and coughing, what are other symptoms of coronavirus?
Well, I think I can let Dr. Paul Yonga answer this. What are the other symptoms? We're talking about sneezing and coughing and everywhere, including our office here. When someone sneezes or coughs, everybody stamps, everybody wants to run away. What are the other symptoms?
Yeah, so in a majority of patients, actually what they experience mostly is really extreme hotness of the body. That's fevers. And then they also present with a dry cough. And most of them as well also present with a sore throat, really, and muscle pains. Most of them really come in with, I must say, much more aggressive symptoms of what will take as a common cold. And that will take place in more than about 80 to 85% of patients. Then when you get to the 10% spectrum, they may present with a bit more difficulty in breathing, what we call dyspnea. And then in another 5% of patients, they now present with atypical symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. In a couple of them now, that's where you now experience issues such as reduced micturition or reduction in your volume of urine, and also an increase in your heart rate. That's really the most severe part of the disease spectrum. But in the majority of patients, they mostly present with extreme hotness of the body, a dry cough, and really muscle pains generally.
I mean, Professor Omonzala, just understanding the behavior of viruses, like you earlier alluded to, the difference between the viruses and the bacteria. For this one, what else should Kenyans look out for? I mean, the feelings in their bodies, because some people start feeling a headache just right here, others is anywhere within their temples, others is just having, a stomachache. What are the other symptoms that Dr. Yonga maybe perhaps has not mentioned?
I think one of the things that we are now beginning to gather is also something to do with sense of smell. There are those who will begin to report quite early that they are losing sense of smell. And that is because of heavy infection within the upper respiratory tract. But the whole issue about how viruses behave is that viruses, unlike bacteria, normally get inside the cell. And once they are inside the cell, the replication is so fast. And all this symptomatology you are hearing being explained here is because of that rapid replication, then the immune system also responds very, very rapidly, and hence the fever, the feeling fatigue, and all these other signs that we are talking about. It is because of that rapid nature. And this virus has also been associated with a very heavy viral load. There's so much of it in the throat and in the respiratory tract.
Dr. Masi, I think you have something to add there, Ronnie, before I ask Dr. Masi a question.
Yes, and just a couple things to emphasize. This is a lower respiratory virus, not an upper respiratory virus. So the cough is a deep cough from the chest, and interestingly, runny nose is really not part of this. That's fairly rare. And that's worth knowing because of the panic that people have when they have any kind of respiratory illness.
I mean, Dr. Mongangi, I'm not sure whether you've interacted with, the patients or heard from their families, but the symptoms we are talking about, are they the same symptoms that you're hearing from the patients who are at Kenyatta and also at Mbagathi?
So yes, Dennis, as the professor and the infectious disease doctors have told us, Dr. Yonga as well, the patients that we have in isolation, the ones who've been confirmed positive, are presenting with these symptoms. But it's important to note that so far, save for the one patient that the CS talked of today, all our patients are more or less stable and are those that are experiencing mild to moderate symptoms. The one patient that we have who is currently being evacuated to Nairobi may be landing in terms of the severe critical band. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Masi. There's also this other question, and there was this whole debate from what Donald Trump, who's the US president, said. And the question is concerning chloroquine and malaria drugs, and there's also talk of HIV drugs, the ARVs. I mean, let's listen into this question concerning malaria drugs.
We have been told the malaria drugs can cure the virus. Why are we then not just making people to live and make sure the high production of the drugs so that people can be cured of the disease? Thank you.
Professor Rodney, what do you think?
Yes. Well, first of all, we don't really have good data on whether chloroquine or its relative hydroxychloroquine work or not. Secondly, if they do work, it's not because of effect on the virus. It would have to be related to an effect on the immune response. There are some drug trials that are out there. We already have evidence that the HIV drugs, at least the ones called protease inhibitors, don't work. There are other drugs being tested right now, and we're all very anxious to see if any of those will change the course of illness.
Well, we saw a lot of patients in Nigeria who had overdosed on this, taken to hospital. And there was also a situation in China where volunteers were also sharing ARV medicines. Dr. Yonga, do you believe there's an ounce of truth in any of this? Does this really work?
Yes, so just as Professor Adam has just mentioned, I think it was just early this week where we just saw the publication whereby the protease inhibitors, that is the anti-HIV drugs, don't seem to be effective in management of these patients. Drugs like hydroxychloroquine, a lot of the data that we are seeing is quite anecdotal. It's not been properly studied in clinical trials. So it's something that we may not seem to suggest with very hard evidence. So it's really, these are drugs that are being administered, I must say, in a very experimental kind of way. The effect can only be properly examined when properly done and ethically approved clinical trials are actually done. So as we speak right now, it's really more anecdotal, more of just reports, but they should be properly validated in clinical trials.
Well, those are just myths. Professor Anzala?
Yeah, but just to add that I think WHO thinks of putting together a well-controlled clinical trial to just look at chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, and azithromycin, and also to look at an HIV drug called Kaletra. So what we are saying is that through those clinical trials, then we shall actually know. But other than maybe Kaletra, which is an antiretroviral drugs, these other drugs will actually be aimed at the immune system and not at the virus itself. So clinical trials are being put into question, and then eventually these drugs are being put into question, and hence the planning of the well-organized randomized clinical trials.
Well, on that note, very quickly, Dr. Massey, we know, like the professor is saying, there are clinical trials. We don't have a vaccine yet, but at the ministry, are there medicines that you're looking at that perhaps could, work perhaps?
So just as Prof. Anzala has mentioned, there are trials that are underway. WHO will be organizing a trial, and it's important to emphasize that when you as a doctor prescribe a drug, there's a protocol through which the drug has to go through, so that we can say that this drug will be useful and this drug will be able to manage the patient. And so far, all the drugs that you've heard of, so the chloroquine drugs, the Kaletra, I've had different people talk about azithromycin, all these drugs will be studied and trials done. It's important to emphasize to Kenyans that we've received reports that people are trying to source for these drugs in the facilities and in the chemists. And we're kindly urging Kenyans that, one, do not take chloroquine and think that it will protect you. The science right now does not prove that, and we are working to see, and under the guidance of WHO and different other bodies, to find out which drugs would be useful. So right now, we are really discouraging Kenyans from going into the chemist trying to source these drugs. We are discouraging Kenyans from trying to source HIV drugs or share HIV patient drugs.
Well, very many thanks, Dr. Massey. Well, the conversation continues here on NTV Weekend Edition. Remember, the hashtag to follow is the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the hashtag. You can also tweet your questions, send them on Facebook as well at NTV Kenya. We'll be able to sample some of them. We have plenty of videos to play for you on the questions that you've been asking. Keep sending them in. We take a short break. We'll be right back.
Sona moja imetengenezwa kwa njia spesheli ili kupambana na maumivu kwa haraka. Sona moja ina aspirin kama kiungo. Sona moja, kitulizo kamili. Maumivu yakizidi, pata ushauri wa daktari.
Stay free whatever. No, we can't stop. We wanna taste the feeling. Nothing can ever bring us down. Taste the feeling.
New Blue Band Peanut Butter. Made with 100% pure peanuts. And a good source of omega-6. Grow healthy and happy kids with New Blue Band Peanut Butter.
Ladies and gentlemen, ready, y'all. Get ready. Ready, set, jump to the rhythm as hard as you can go. Steady, to the letter right, turn it up, we're giving a show.
Hey.
Hey.
What'd I miss?
Niaje wa Kenya. Hii ni public service announcement kuhusu coronavirus.
The Ministry of Health advises all returnees from abroad to self-quarantine for at least 14 days, whether they feel well or unwell.
Wash your hands regularly following the 8 steps of hand washing. Wet hands with warm water. Apply a small amount of soap. Rub palms together. Rub fingers and thumbs and the bits in between. Rub nails on palms. Rub the back of each hand. Rinse with clean running water and dry thoroughly with a clean dry towel.
Furthermore, it is advisable to cover your mouth and nose adequately when sneezing or coughing and immediately dispose of the tissue in a dustbin. Please do not use handkerchiefs if you can avoid it. If disposable tissue is unavailable, cough into your elbow. Try and avoid close contact with anyone showing signs of respiratory illness, such as coughing or sneezing.
Before you share any coronavirus information on social media, please verify it with Ministry of Health to avoid panic and alarm among your fellow Kenyans.
I help women find independence by training them in fish farming. It's tough on my back, joints, and can cause headaches. Panadol Extra relieves multiple types of pain. Panadol Extra, now with new Optizorb technology to fight multiple tough pains with 3 times more pain-relieving medicine in the first 30 minutes when you need it most. Seeing them support themselves makes any pain worth it. If symptoms persist, seek medical advice.
Welcome back to our special coverage on the COVID-19 pandemic, and in studio I have medical experts with me. I have Professor Rodney Adam, who's an infectious disease specialist from the Aga Khan University Hospital. I also have with me Professor Omu Anzala, who's Professor of Virology and Immunology, Kavi Institute of Clinical Research, University of Nairobi. We also have Dr. Paul Yonga, who's the infectious diseases travel medicine specialist. And we also have Dr. Mercy Mwangangi, who's the Chief Administrative Secretary, Ministry of Health. We have many of your questions which you've been sending through WhatsApp videos. We're also going to be looking at some that you've been sending to us at NTV Kenya, that's on Twitter. Remember, the hashtag to follow is the COVID-19 pandemic. You can tag me at Dennis Okari as well. Let's go to the next question here, and it's about dead bodies.
Can a dead person transmit coronavirus if the corpse is not properly?
Well, I'll let Professor Anzala go straight into this. Dead bodies. There's a concern that the government is restricting the number of people who can go to burials, but we're coming from different cultures. There are those who will have to handle the bodies before they bury them. So what do you think about this?
Actually, the advice is 2 ways. The reason why we are trying to discourage huge gatherings at funeral is the issue of social distancing. That is one. But number 2 also, we are also trying to discourage handling of the body excessively, because secretions from the respiratory tract will still carry virus for a while before the virus is actually disseminated as the body decays. So on those 2 counts, that is the reason. But for the healthcare workers, we are discouraging handling that body excessively. We are also actually trying to discourage postmortems until we get good guidelines as to how we are going to conduct those particular postmortems.
Dr. Yonga?
Yes, I fully agree with Professor Anzala. And of course, the other thing is right now, as you're continuing to learn more about the virus, we still do not know a lot about the transmission dynamics of how this virus is transmitted. And so part of the precautions really would be to try and limit as much as possible contact with bodies of people that may have died from COVID-19. Of course, in addition to the social distancing mechanisms that have been put in place.
Well, Dr. Mercy, what I'm hearing here is just avoiding handling the bodies, excessively. But Do dead bodies, can you get infected from dead bodies?
So, Dennis, so far the science tells us that the secretions and the virus is able to survive for up to a certain number of days, and we're still studying to know this. So, indeed, we need to observe caution when we're handling any dead bodies. If we look at what's happening in Italy and China, we've been able to discuss with them, and the Chinese were able to share with us the precautions that they took in terms of offering the last rites for some of their bodies. And they did observe even elements of, distancing and wearing protective gear while burying their dead. So indeed, right now we are cautioning. Now is not the time to have that continuous, engagement. During the funerals, as CS Motai directed, we want less than 15 people in attendance. We want restrictions towards family members only, and we want to avoid that continuous, engagement with the bodies. Because right now we are learning, and it's a new virus. We're still drawing lessons.
Well, the next question is about sexually transmitted diseases.
Can corona be transmitted sexually? And what was its actual cause?
Well, not too sure that the gentleman was trying to disconnect electricity for some people there, but his question is very, very direct. I mean, there's this debate on you don't kiss, then you don't cough next to someone or sneeze. So it's about fluids, STDs. I'll start with Professor Rodney Adam. What do you think about this?
Well, first of all, usually with sexual activity, there is also exchange of secretions that includes kissing, which is likely to be a high-risk kind of contact. So whether it is strictly sexually transmitted, with Ebola, it turned out to be that it was. I don't know that we have any direct evidence here, but maybe Prof. Anzala can comment further.
You see, if we just look at holistically in terms of how sex is practiced, holistically, I would actually say that that this virus, because you are not observing social distancing, can be transmitted through that holistic sexual activity. So the whole issue is that stay away from people you totally don't know completely, because you don't know whether they are infected or not, because protection really has to start with yourself. Take good care of yourself and stay away from all these things, because you cannot isolate just one activity and say that this one, if I do, it will stop me from getting but all these others. Because let's look at how sexually activity is conducted holistically. We now know, and we didn't know, that Ebola would actually remain in semen for prolonged period of time. We never knew that. We now know. This is a completely new virus. We know we can get this virus in stool. We can also get this virus in urine to some extent. We can get it in throat secretions. It can also be found in blood. All these are fluids. So for me, holistically, at this point in time, unless there's additional information, a sexual activity, the way it is practiced, can transmit this particular virus.
So, Professor, are you saying for a viewer who's watching that even for, married couples, they should not holistically, they are putting it, engage in this just to avoid this transmission?
You see, for me, I'm looking at people you totally don't know. You see, when you are a married couple, you'll be staying in the same house. And we are telling people to stay at home. You'll be staying with your family, with your wife, and your children. But what we are talking about is the activity of being outside with people you're actually not familiar with, and then disobeying the rules of social distancing. That's what I'm alluding to.
I mean, Dr. Massey, from a government's perspective, is this something that you've perhaps discussed, and is this something that you'll try and educate the public? How does this connect? Because it's a really big concern for a lot of people.
Right, so what we're saying is social distance, and Social distancing includes when you're at the workplace, you need to ensure that there's distances. Within offices, we actually have emphasized and given advisories that people should work from home. But then if you're distancing and you're within the home, it's important that Kenyans are aware that right now there's a case definition of our most suspected cases. Now, if you've not traveled to a country that's high burden, or you've not come back into the country, and that you've actually followed the government's instructions in terms of working at home, in social distancing, in washing your hands, in disinfecting surfaces, then indeed I believe as a couple living within a household, then yes, you can engage in that sexual activity. But what we are discouraging you to do, and I think this was emphasized today, the bars will be closed, the entertainment spots will be closed. Do not engage in any interactions that will make you come close to someone who is not within your household. Remember, should we end up needing to contact trace people who've had contact with any positive cases, how you help us make it work, how you actually contribute is by staying within your household, and therefore, if anyone in your household is afflicted, we would be able to know this is the set of people that we are dealing with. So we're really discouraging people going outside of their families, outside of their households to engage in any sexual activities.
Well, we'll be coming back with more of your questions, including an answer. I'm really interested to hear what Dr. Young has to say. He's the youngest in the panel, how practical this really is, because we are struggling with social distancing and telling people not to holistically, like Professor is putting it. I'm not sure how this is going to work, but we'll come back with more of your questions. Remember, you can keep tweeting us. The hashtag is the COVID-19 pandemic, and you can tweet us at NTV Kenya, and we'll sample some of your tweets and your questions to the medical panel that we have tonight in our special coverage on coronavirus.
Niaje wa Kenya. Hii ni public service announcement kuhusu coronavirus.
The Ministry of Health advises all returnees from abroad to self-quarantine for at least 14 days, whether they feel well or unwell.
Wash your hands regularly following the 8 steps of hand washing. Wet hands with warm water. Apply a small amount of soap. Rub palms together. Rub fingers and thumbs and the bits in between. Rub nails on palms, rub the back of each hand, rinse with clean running water, and dry thoroughly with a clean dry towel.
Furthermore, it is advisable to cover your mouth and nose adequately when sneezing or coughing and immediately dispose of the tissue in a dustbin. Please do not use handkerchiefs if you can avoid it. If disposable tissue is unavailable, cough into your elbow. Try and avoid close contact with anyone showing signs of respiratory illness, such as coughing or sneezing.
Before you share any coronavirus information on social media, please verify it with Ministry of Health to avoid panic and alarm among your fellow Kenyans.
Basic protective measures as guided by the World Health Organization. Clean hands frequently with soap and clean water. Cover nose and mouth when coughing and sneezing with a tissue or flexed elbow. Avoid close contact 1 meter or 3 feet with anyone with cold or flu-like symptoms. If you have fever, cough and difficulty breathing, seek medical care early. Avoid raw or uncooked animal products. Help the world put an end to the spread of respiratory diseases by sharing this message with a friend. Message brought to you by Sour Herbal Family Bath Soap.
So we feel forever be real, together stay free whatever ends. No, we can't stop. We wanna taste the feeling. Nothing can ever bring us
3 minutes past the hour. We're still continuing with our special broadcast tonight on COVID-19 pandemic. We have medical experts in studio here to answer your questions on Twitter, Facebook, and also some of the videos that you sent to us via WhatsApp. I have with me Professor Rodney Adam from the Aga Khan University Hospital, Dr. Paul Yonga, an infectious diseases travel medicine specialist, Dr. Mercy Mwangangi, who's the Chief Administrative Secretary, Ministry of Health. So the government is fully represented here. We also have Professor Omu Anzala, Professor of Virology and Immunology. Before I lose my voice, I want us to go straight to the next question. Well, I'm not sure if any of you understands that, but David Agondoa tried to help us out on this one. It's about the number 719. And what she's asking is that what will the deaf people do? You have 719, people will call that number. What about those who are deaf, Dr. Mercy?
Right, so we've deployed the 719 number, and we do appreciate that we will need to have an audio-visual mechanism of being able to engage with the deaf. We do have teams working also on translation in terms of Braille to be able to engage with people who may have a need for these extra support services. The 719 number right now is actually what we're advocating for Kenyans to use. Should you have any symptoms, should you feel like you're having that that cough that's deep and you're having difficulties in terms of any chest symptomology, we're actually advocating that instead of rushing to a health facility, you call 719 and then you get guidance as to how to be able to get to the health facility. But I'd like to say and take the guidance that we've received here. We are going to work on seeing how we expand this service to be able to meet the needs of all Kenyans.
Well, Dr. Mercy, there's also another one here that came in a bit earlier also. We've had stories of people breaking out of isolation in other countries. Also in Kenya, we've heard that can a hospital hold you against your will, and does this happen in Kenya?
Right, so we want to be very clear. The government is not taking this coronavirus issue as a joke. And the Cabinet Secretary, Mutahi Kagwe, has actually invoked the Public Health Act. The Public Health Act gives the Cabinet Secretary and the Minister of Health ability to be able to enforce whatever interventions will actually be able to contain this virus. So yes, from invoking the act, we do actually have a mandate now to detain patients, those who might not abide by the instructions issued by government.
And do we have a situation whereby we've had a patient who's broken out of isolation?
So far, I must commend the patients who we have in isolation and those who we've discharged. They've been cooperative. And it's important to note that an isolation or quarantine situation is anxiety-inducing. So we do appreciate that the patients and the families may experience anxieties, and we are working very hard to ensure that it is as comfortable as possible. But it's important to also note that we need to go beyond comfort, and we need to realize that this is a matter of public health emergency, and we need to protect our country. So yes, indeed, we are invoking the Public Health Act, and you will see enforcement of this act in terms of trying to contain COVID-19.
Let's go to our next video, and the question is about immunity.
Can someone become immune to COVID-19, and can the virus mutate?
Okay, Professor Anzala.
Yeah, it is true. For those who recover, they develop an immune system. They develop immune responses, both cells and antibodies to this virus. So to a big extent, yes, there is immune response. What we are now interested in is to learn how long this immune response can last. And the question we are asking that after you have suffered infection, are you prone again to be reinfected? Because if you are, then your immune system is not working. So those are the things. If the immune system is working very well and the immune response is good, then that is again the immune response we are learning that will lead us to develop a vaccine. Now, number two, in terms of immunization, Yes, this virus is prone to mutation because of the way it replicates. As we speak, we now know that there are 2 circulating strains with a significant difference. We don't know how it will mutate, and that is the reason why, as we manage the patients, there's also an element of research to be able to understand the immune responses, how long these immune responses last, and also the mutations and what directions these mutations are taking, because all these things will advise in terms of treatment, in terms of development of new treatments, but all this information will also advise in terms of vaccine development.
Well, the next question, I will want to throw it to Dr. Paul Yonga, but before then, I just want to allow Professor Ronnie Adam to just jump in quickly. In light of what Professor Nzala has said, there is also this rumor that was going around, especially in the UK, that they were allowing the numbers to really go high because they are trying to also to try and see chances of creating an immunity system, so to speak. I don't have an idea how that one works.
Well, with any kind of infection where you get long-lasting protection after your own infection, it means that it's harder for a virus to spread through a population. And it varies according to the virus, but if you have enough people who have immunity, then the virus doesn't spread. The problem is that you have to get to that level, and if you allow it to get to that level, you've already exposed a huge number of people and had a huge number of people develop infection, some of them dying. So the idea makes sense for some viruses. In this one that's new, it doesn't make sense.
It's pretty much taking a big risk. So let's listen into the next question, and it's about insects.
Can insects such as flies and mosquitoes transmit coronavirus?
Very interesting question from that young lady. Dr. Paul Yonga.
Yeah, so far we've not come across any evidence that seems to suggest that the virus can be spread through certain vectors, be it mosquitoes or ticks. So of course these are things that will continue being studied as we go along, but so far we've not had any hard evidence to suggest the presence of vectors or lice or mice as possible transmitters of this virus, no.
Dr. Mercy?
No, just as Dr. Yonga has said, we don't have any evidence that shows any formites, any vectors, be they mosquitoes, the ticks, locusts. I've had people saying, are the locusts related to coronavirus? We do not have any evidence that we can have such transmission. Again, it's a new virus and we're trying to learn as much as we can about it.
The next question is about the Mombasa ferry.
Swali langu ni kwa serikali kuu kuhusiana na hii corona. Je, mna mipango ipi kuhusiana na kile kivuko chetu pale Likoni ferry? Ama sisi watu wa pwani tumesahaulika tukawachwa?
So for my 3 panelists, I'm sure you understand that question, but for Professor Ronnie Adam, what she's asking is, she's just raising concerns about the ferry in Mombasa because there are huge populations of people who cross the Likoni Channel using the ferry, and they feel like they've been forgotten around this coronavirus thing. I will start with Dr. Mercy before I go to Rodney.
Right. So this afternoon, the Cabinet Secretary chaired the NERC, the National Emergency Response Committee. And in this committee, we have Cabinet Secretaries from the Ministry of Transport who are reviewing this situation. We've already issued directives concerning public transport with regards to the matatus and the public service vehicles. And we're currently reviewing to see, and at the right time, those measures will be announced to the public in terms of how do we ferry people in terms of the big ferries. The same will apply in terms of counties who may need to cross using boats. We've noticed people are crowding within boats, and this is going to be reviewed, and the NERC will be able to issue further instructions. So it's a matter that's under review right now.
So in short, what you're saying, Daktari, is that perhaps maybe this week or in the near future, the same way there have been directives to try and reduce the number of passengers in our PSVs, we might see a reduction of numbers of those who will be crossing the Likoni Channel using the ferry.
So So, Dennis, as different countries have intervened with regards to COVID-19, they've had to introduce sequentially and enhanced measures. So right now, the issue is under review, and as we started, if you remember when we had our first cases, Kenyans were still using public transport, but then the teams reviewing and trying to advise us in how we can best manage this situation emphasized we need to social distance more. And so therein, the CS was able to direct reduced capacities of matatus. As the situation evolves, as we monitor it, as we get more data, the NERC will be able to give instructions and directives. But then there's one big measure that Kenyans can help us: stay home. If you can, stay home, social distance, and avoid movement that is unnecessary.
And avoid the ferry, pretty much, that's what you're saying,
Yes.
if you can.
If you don't need to be on a ferry, you know, for whatever purpose that, you know, extreme emergency, then don't be on the ferry.
Well, Professor Ronnie Adam, you want to jump in on this and also perhaps answer this other one. It's just a follow-up to what the gentleman was asking about the tropical climate that we have in the country. It's very humid in Mombasa. And there are people who are arguing and saying the virus can't get to Mombasa because of that humidity.
Well, I think the issue of the ferry has been addressed adequately. It's about physical distance, which is probably a better term than social distance, but because we're trying to stay a certain amount distance away. And the next question again.
The question I was asking was about the tropical climate you have in the country and many countries in the continent. It's very humid in Mombasa, and there are people who argue that the temperatures there and the climate there does not favor the spread of the COVID-19 virus.
Well, first of all, that was coming up when we didn't have any cases in sub-Saharan Africa, or when very few countries had them. But the question there was, you can't even answer that question until you have your first case and know what the spread is like. And it's also worth remembering that this virus likes the temperature between 37 and 40. That's in the human host. And it doesn't have to take very long to get from one host to another. So there are a lot of hypotheses out there, but no good evidence that climate is going to have a substantial impact.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Rodney Adam. We have another question before we take a break from Ruben.
What makes it so dangerous in the human body? The second question, I've heard that the virus was engineered and that 4 components of HIV were added to it. Is that true? We expect that the coronavirus COVID-19 will have a negative impact on our already backward economy, hence reducing productivity and the gross domestic product. What measures can our government put in place to minimize the effects it will have?
Well, those are sort of like 3 questions in that video, but I'll throw the first one to Dr. Paul Yonga. What makes this very, very dangerous?
Yep. So far we know of 2 mechanisms. So the first mechanism that we've currently seen is that when the virus actually accesses your respiratory system, it binds into a protein that actually enables it to enter the cell. And by these cells, we mean the alveolar cells within your respiratory tract. So when it enters there, it sort of tries to uncoat itself, then tries to replicate within that cell. And then the smaller viruses try to coat again, and then it literally busts that cell open, and then those smaller viral components infect other cells, and that lowers your capacity to actually undergo the oxygen-carbon dioxide exchange. That's the first thing. The second mechanism is whereby when the virus enters, just as Professor Nzala mentioned at the very beginning, your body elicits some sort of immune response. It's more like soldiers trying to fight, whereby there's a bit of friendly fire. So some of these immune cells try to release certain chemicals that actually injure the lung. And then when the lung starts recovering, the lung becomes very stiff. So it becomes very hard for the lung to have its expansile capacity. So that's what brings about the respiratory distress that a number of patients present with in very critical stages. So literally, if there's no oxygen in your body, or there's compromise between the oxygen and carbon dioxide capacity within your lung, then that of course becomes fatal to people.
Dr. Masi, very, very quickly, the last bit about cushioning with the current economic status that we have in the country. I'm not sure whether you can authoritatively answer this, but from the government standpoint, how do you see this?
So what I can assure Kenyans is there are teams, the Cabinet Secretary of Finance, in Treasury, along with other high-level government officials working on this issue. And the world over, it's important to appreciate that COVID-19 has been able to distress the whole global economy. Different countries have seen different effects that have hampered the growth and productivity of their economies. The mere fact of social distancing and needing people to stay at home, of course, would have an effect on the labor force. But all these are issues that are under deliberation, and I'm sure within the right time, the President and his team will be able to inform Kenyans of measures that will be undertaken.
Well, I've seen Professor Mwanzala want to just quickly, before you take a break.
Then is the whole issue that this virus is similar to HIV, that some things were taken from HIV to make this virus is totally false. Also, the issue that this virus was manufactured in the lab is totally false. What research is showing us...
Oh, Professor Omozala, sorry, I'll just disrupt you a bit. We have to take this break. We have to sort something out with your camera. We'll be right back with your response. And also, we'll be looking at your social media feedback. The questions that you've sent, we'll be reading some of them through, and our medical experts will be answering those questions. We'll be right back.
Protect yourself against coronavirus by using Amara antibacterial hand sanitizer that will effectively clean your hands and eliminate disease-causing virus while you're on the go.
Molfix breathable surface developed with Airsoft technology is very soft and provides the best Molfix skincare.
I found the best diaper for my baby's sensitive skin.
All babies deserve a high-quality diaper. You should also try Molfix.
This week, Egerton University take on art as they dig deep into the use of art to preserve our history.
Where exactly? Can you tell us like the exact location, because as in maps ni tricky. Okay.
Turn left.
Hapo left, hapo. Hapa. Hapa.
We shouldn't turn off the main road. Okay.
Welcome home to Amani Ridge, the place of peace. Invest in Amani Ridge, the place of peace. Call us today on 0790 300 300 or visit www.optivan.co.ke.
Welcome back to NTV Weekend Edition, our special coverage on the COVID-19 pandemic. We have medical experts in studio, Professor Rodney Adam, Dr. Paul Yonga, we have Dr. Mercy Mwangangi and Professor Omwanzala. And before we went for the break, Professor Omwanzala, you're responding to a question by a gentleman who was talking about how dangerous this is, and you're also responding to this virus being engineered in the lab.
Yes, those are the myths that we totally want to put aside. One, this virus was not engineered in the lab. What we know is that coronaviruses do exist in the environment. We have 4 corona human viruses that cause common cold. They are common. They are the second most common causes of respiratory infection. Then we have a lot of animals that carry their own coronaviruses. Bats carry coronavirus, camels carry coronaviruses, snakes do carry coronaviruses. So coronaviruses are not new. And this particular one has not been engineered in the lab at all. It was a spillover from an animal to a human.
So, Professor, why is it called COVID-19? Where's the 19 coming from?
The 19 is because of the year. I think WHO really didn't want to call it Wuhan. You remember Spanish flu, all right? Then you remember we have called viruses according to the various names. We have called Marburg.
Oh, and Donald Trump has called it the Chinese
Marburg
virus.
is actually a town in Germany. So they wanted to avoid that because it then stigmatizes the disease, and hence the word COVID. COVID is a disease, and the virus is severe acute respiratory coronavirus 2.
All right.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Let's now go straight to your social media feedback, questions that you've asked us, and we will go to our Twitter page and we'll read one of the questions that you've asked. Psycho MF Clown, an interesting name there, says, what drugs are the patients being given to those already confirmed positive? That's the first part of the question. Is the public supposed to know what they're being treated with? I think I'll throw this straight to Dr. Mercy Mwangangi.
Right, so we've emphasized today, so far the patients who are coming in at Mbagathi are being managed according to a treatment protocol that's developed by the Ministry of Health. And so far, I wouldn't call any drug set that we are giving these patients. Usually, these patients would present either with mild symptoms or moderate symptoms of a pneumonia. So we are managing them as you would manage such a case of viral pneumonia. There are no drugs that we are administering to these patients right now. And like we mentioned earlier, WHO is conducting clinical trials that will determine if the drugs that are being mentioned, the chloroquines, hydroxychloroquines, the Kaletra, if these drugs actually have an effect. But so far, for our patients in the country who are stable, are on supportive treatment, supportive management treatment for any other viral pneumonia as you would have.
Well, Professor Rodney Adam, I think I'll throw this at you. And this is also coming from our Twitter feed. And this person, this lady is actually asking, this is Wairimo Caroline. She's asking, if one recovers, can you be reinfected?
That's a great question. And we need more data and more time to find out. Because we know that people who recover eliminate the virus. So at least for the short term, they are protected. But how long? Is it weeks or months or years? And what we're all hoping is that it's going to be years, because that means that vaccine development may truly have a chance for helping to prevent this infection in the future.
Well, Anzala, Professor, this one is for you, and this one comes from Omido Joe, who's asking, as Africans, we often share food from one plate and eat with our hands from the plates. This is very common in bars and restaurants, although the government has said they must be closed. Talk of nyama choma, tumbukiza, boilo, etc. How safe is this?
Actually, what was said today is exactly what we wanted to hear. We have escalated the social distancing, and those are the things that should stop immediately. You heard the minister say that the restaurants that are going to open will only open for takeaway, because we know that touching food when you have not washed your hands very well, and you are coughing on your hands and doing all these things, this is the way this virus is actually transmitted. So the measures we are putting in place now are actually measures to stop those areas of where food touching of not washing very well can be able to transmit, and hence ensuring that you only engage in takeaway where you can go home and share food with your loved ones, but not in social places where we crowd and we go around with all this tumbukizas and sharing all this that is likely to assist in the transmission of this virus.
Well, very many thanks, Professor, and I think that's where we have to wind up. We have run out of time. I wish we could go on this. I'm sure we'll try and invite you again. We just conclude this, if there will be any conclusion, because there's still so many questions that Kenyans have. But many thanks for finding your time to just join us here in studio. We were with Professor Rodney Adam, who is an infectious disease specialist from the Aga Khan University Hospital. Also, Dr. Paul Yonga, who's the youngest in the panel, an infectious disease travel medicine specialist. We also had Professor Omwanzala, who's just spoken lastly here, Professor of Virology and Immunology, Kavi Institute of Clinical Research, University of Nairobi, and last but not least, the only lady on the panel, Dr. Mercy Mwangangi, Chief Administrative Secretary, Ministry of Health. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Viewers, thank you so much for the questions that you have been sending. Let's keep this conversation going. Stay safe, stay at home, like what the government is saying, and just be there to watch each other's back. My name is Dennis Okari. That's all the time we had. Good night and enjoy the rest of your viewing, and have a great week ahead of you.